So higher education. So this is college and universities, primarily universities. It's all gone to the administrators, and it's nothing but universities are just nothing but administrators now. It's high percent of administration, and it's just these people that are sort of doing things. And there's no professors that are there. There is, the professors don't do anything. And it's just being run by these administrators. Now, you also hear that higher education has just become very client centric, right? And students are client. And I want to tell you this, all of this is a little strange to me, to be honest. So there is this store in Canada. There's these two stores in Canada. One of them is so they're both government run, pseudo government entities, and one of them is the liquor store, the LCBO. So this is in Ontario. And the other one is the beer store. They're both pseudo government entities. One of them chose to be very client centric. That's the LCBO. And the other one chose to be run like, the sort of traditional entities that you think would be run by a government, the beer store. Now, the LCBO, the liquor store, that's what we call it in Ontario, it's a pleasant experience. It's really wonderful to go into. Lots of people go into it, and they've actually had substantial growth in terms of, the number of people that go there, and now they have this sort of big sort of wine clientele. It's actually a really pleasant experience. I don't drink alcohol. I used to at one point, but I really don't drink it anymore. And but when I go into the store, it feels nice. It's a really pleasant experience. Now, when you go into the beer store, and I just recently went into it a couple of months ago. I don't live in Ontario, but I visit family. And it feels like going into a 1970s basement. It stinks like beer. It is very, I don't know how to put this politely. It's very intimidating, I guess. So I'm a guy, I'm a dude, and it feels very manly men when I go in there, and it is not necessarily something that it's not a pleasant experience. It's like going into a bathroom where you have urinals that are too close together. And it's a very, very unpleasant experience when you go into the beer store. Now, these two are run, and the reason why I'm talking about this in terms of higher education, one of them has the view that, that we can change things and we can do things better. The other one is sort of maintain the same sort of government-run organization that feels like not a good experience. Now, what does this have to do with higher education? Well, one way that higher education can cut costs and do a good job, there's two ways that we could do this, right? One of them is to provide technology. I'll talk about that in a minute. The other one is to get more private sources of money and actually think about running it as more of a sort of profit center, right? And if you run it as a profit center, what you have to do, and so the states and governments and stuff, they'll say, hey, we're not giving you any more money. Go fend for yourself. And so how do you fend for yourself, right? So what you need to do is think about how to gain economies of scale and make sure things are run efficiently. And you also have to think about ways that you could generate more revenue. So one way that you can get economies of scale and run things more efficiently is have managers that run different parts of the organization so that people like myself, researchers, don't necessarily have to worry about all of the nitty-gritty stuff. Now, I still do far too much nitty-gritty stuff, paperwork and all this kind of stuff. But I know that there's lots of people that are actually doing that for me in other areas of my life, right? So I can spend more time doing research because that is the number one thing that actually matters is producing research for particularly research-oriented universities, but this is universities in general. Now, the other thing that they end up doing is they look for ways that they can get private donors. So what is the easiest way to get private donors? Well, you get what is called the development officer, and this development officer, you pay them handsomely, right? You might pay them, I don't know, I have no idea what they get paid, but let's say you pay them $100,000, which is probably pretty comparable if you were to do quote unquote sales, not really sales, but you know what I'm talking about. So sales across the, any industry. And so you pay them handsomely, but here's the catch. You don't pay them handsomely knowing that they're actually not going to generate any revenue. You pay them $100,000 expecting that they're going to bring in $500,000. And if they do, that is a good thing to actually do. So right there's more administrators because you're actually running things more efficiently and more effectively, right? So it's actually a good thing to have more administration. It's just like thinking about charities, the sort of overhead cost belief that we should have no overhead is nonsense, right? You're not thinking about what an organization actually does. Now, the second thing that you can do to reduce costs is to have technological progress. So what does that mean in the educational sense? That means encouraging people to use artificial intelligence. That means encouraging people to use, things like Zoom, making sure that you have maybe online courses, these kind of things. But we know that people are uncomfortable with those, right? So we're very much constrained. And those are just norms that, they're very much norms. We could do far better, right? Sal Khan at the Khan Academy is doing some wonderful things, but if you actually, do education, how many people do you know that will actually just read things or, just go to the library and read? Sal Khan is completely free. Khan Academy is completely, but get your kids to actually do that without forcing them to do it is like, hell's no, right? So how do you encourage people to actually learn? You have to have somebody that's guiding them and giving them the right sort of insights in the sense of hey, let's go over here and let's explore these kind of things. So we're kind of constrained in what we can allow in terms of technological progress. For the time being, it's constrained more slower than I think what business and industry could do because of the sort of norms that we actually have, but just because of human behavior, right? Like humans are, we're rational beings. It means rational beings in another way that you can call it in an impolite way is just lazy, right? Like we rationalize things. We sort of look for ways to do efficient things efficiently, and if you can get a degree in the most efficient way, that means that, hey, I'm not going to actually pay attention and still get my degree. I'm going to get a C or a D, but that's okay. I still get a degree at the end of it. That's being completely rational and, being what you should be doing as a human being, right? It's irrational to devote your time and effort to it and know that it doesn't actually matter in the end, right? If you have no incentive to do anything with it or go on and, be a titan of industry, why the hell would you actually study? Like, who cares, right? If you're just going to sit there and, just plug in your job for the rest of your life, that's what people are actually going to do, right? So the idea, what I'm getting to, is this idea that there's too many administrators or that there's too much overhead. It's ludicrous. And as far as I'm concerned, that means that universities, that organizations are being run effectively and they're doing a good job. It's like looking at any organization and saying, oh, you have too many employees or you have too many managers. Anytime that I hear that, I get nervous. because that tells me somebody doesn't know what they're actually doing. Some years ago, uh, I used to work for the Ontario Ministry of Health, which is the largest health organization in North America. It's really big. Um, and what they did is, at one point, they decided to lay a bunch of people off because they were expensive. They laid off the senior man and the senior folks. What they ended up doing, because those senior folks that were very expensive, they ended up having to rehire them back as consultants, and paying them basically twice as much money because that they sort of didn't understand that those were the most valuable managers, the most valuable people that were there. And we need to think about, like, okay, what does this mean? What is the implication here? Just because you pay somebody a salary, their salaries doesn't mean that they're a cost. I always encourage people to think, particularly in my classes, I always encourage them to think about both sides of the profit equation. Now, one of that is, and students, I talk about how irrational this is, right? Like, we think about higher education just in terms of cost, and we don't measure the revenue that's being generated and the value that's being generated. Of course, it seems expensive. Everything seems expensive. Look at your house, right? Or wherever you're living. I don't know where you live, in your apartment. It looks very expensive, but damn it, man, it's still better than living in a tent. I mentioned that anybody who wants to make a bunch of money, by the way, and you want to be well off for the rest of your life, live in a tent. Just live in a tent, work a normal job, live in a tent, invest the rest, and you will be multi-millionaires by the time that you're 65 years old. Who wants to live in a tent, right? There's a value that's being generated to you, to society, to live in a house or things that have something that you feel that they're actually home. So what I want to get at is, just because you pay money for something doesn't mean that there's any value, that there's no value being created there. And we have to consider both sides of the equation if we are actually going to progress in this conversation. It's not just about the cost that's involved. It's not just about administrators, but it's also about what value is being generated. Now, education tends to be one of these things that's very hard to generate a number of the value that's being generated. It's not easy to sort of put that calculation down. There's lots of things that happen, but I want you to go to a society, I want you to go to a country in your head where higher education is not prioritized. And it's going to be, first of all, it's going to be hard not to find one in a developed country that doesn't, in any developed country that doesn't emphasize higher education because of its critical importance. But also, if you find one that doesn't do as good of a job, and I might be living in one right now where it's maybe not as good of a job as other ones. I know that there's many countries that do phenomenal jobs with their higher education system. And if you can name one that doesn't do as good of a job, you're going to realize that their economy doesn't nearly grow as much. But you're also going to realize that the ones where there's countries that are growing, and they don't have a strong higher education system. I can think of several countries in my mind that are growing like gangbusters, some of the world's largest economies at this moment. They have lots and lots of people in them. They are seeking to build up their higher education system, and they're seeking to grow it exponentially over the next few decades because of its critical importance. So I just encourage you to think about that. Administrators are not a bad thing, and higher education costs are not a bad thing. We have to look at the value that's actually being generated when you start making these calculations. Take care and have a wonderful day.